am going to close this agenda item, and we are going to move on to agenda item 5.2, substitute teacher pay structure. Superintendent Jara?
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, I'll just turn it over briefly after I make my opening comments I know that our Chief of HR, Nadine Jones, there she is, joining us to present with her team. I know that this has been a long time coming. Remember that we were going to bring this to this board March 26th, and we are here today due to not because the board and the lack of interest of this board. I know that the board continues to understand that there's a need, and so does this administration. I know the team has been working diligently and had a plan in place to really look at the need. I know we've heard a lot of comments, and they did not go unheard. We were really listening and understanding that there is a need. I believe it's been over a decade and a half, maybe close to 2 decades of the need. And I know that our substitutes are a viable and a key members of the team and provide a great service to our families and our students. Given where we are with the economy, given where we are, we still feel, and I know that this board does as well, that we would need to make the necessary investment that will improve our operations on a day-to-day in our classrooms and in our buildings. So, and now I just want to make those comments for the members of the public, and I know that the board feels the same sentiments around our substitute staff. Can turn it over to our Chief of HR, Ms. Nadine Jones.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Jara. My name is Nadine Jones for the record. This evening, we want to share with you our current substitute teacher pay structure, as well as some comparative data that was used in part to help formulate this potential structure for the board's review and discussion. Ms. Kimberly Daniels is our Director of Substitute Services. She's been in the role for the past 2 years, and as such is closest to the administrative processes of our substitute services team. Ms. Daniels did the vast majority of the work on this, so I will ask her to walk us through the presentation before we take your questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Daniels.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, and Superintendent Jara. My name is Kimberly Daniels for the record, and thank you for your time today. Next slide. I'd like to begin by sharing a few quick statistics about our current substitute teacher pool. This data was collected March 6, 2020, which was a week prior to the closure of school buildings. At this time, we had 4,264 active substitutes. Out of those substitutes, 3,465 are classified as day-to-day substitutes. These are individuals that are available to choose assignments and generally accept jobs that are anywhere from 1 to 10 days in length. 706 of those substitutes are in assignments where a regular status teacher has not been hired, which is referred to as a vacancy substitute. 453 substitutes have not selected jobs since the beginning of the year, and 93 of them are long-term substitutes and were in placements where the teacher was absent over 10 days. Next slide. With this pool of substitute teachers, we've achieved an 80% average daily fill rate for the 2019-2020 school year. Our average fill rate for Mondays is 79%, and our average fill rate for Fridays is 77%. Mondays and Fridays are generally our peak days where we receive the highest number of requests. Next slide. So in our current structure, there's a list of schools that are identified as East Northeast. This list was created more than 18 years ago to encourage substitutes to pick up jobs at sites that at the time were considered to be the least accessible sites in terms of distance. So today, if a substitute selects an assignment at an East Northeast site, they would receive $110 per day. In the potential structure, we would eliminate the East-Northeast list, but maintain an early hiring list. Schools on the early hiring list are schools that have been identified as having higher needs based on Title I status, the number of free and reduced lunch participants, as well as any school that has received the Innovative 8 designation. These factors are reviewed annually, and the list will be updated to reflect the changing needs of school sites. Schools on the early hiring list also are permitted to staff their schools sooner, and they have priority access to the applicant pool. In the potential structure, substitutes would earn $110 per day at standard sites and $120 per day at early hiring sites. Next slide. In our current structure, a long-term substitute, which is defined as a person in an assignment more than 10 days, receives $100 on the 11th day at a standard site and $120 on the 11th day at an East-Northeast site. In the potential structure, long-term substitutes at standard locations would earn $130 on the 11th day and beyond, and substitutes at early hiring sites would earn $140 on the 11th day and beyond. Pardon me. Next slide. Vacancy substitutes are defined as individuals in assignments where a regular status employee has not been hired. Currently, they receive $110 per day beginning on the first day of the assignment at a standard location and $120 per day at an East-Northeast location. In the potential structure, they would receive $140 beginning on the first day at a standard location and $150 a day at an early hiring site, also beginning on the first day. Next slide. So right now, vacancy subs in special education hard to fill positions make $150 on the 21st day. In the potential structure, they would make $150 from the very first day of the assignment at all locations. Next slide. Here's a list of the daily pay range of some other major districts, just for frame of reference. Next slide. And then on slide 9, you'll find the estimated cost and projection. So our substitute cost for the 2019 fiscal year was $32.7 million. The potential structure will increase that cost by $4.8 million, which is a total cost of $37.5 million. This would equate in a 14.6% increase in pay for substitutes. Next slide. The potential pay structure will ensure that all substitutes make a minimum of $110 per day, regardless of their location, and that they receive additional compensation for accepting hard-to-fill positions and making long-term commitments to schools that often result in additional duties. Lastly, the plan aligns pay with the early hire structure and allows for a fluid list that reflects the changing needs of the school sites. So currently, substitutes can earn the higher pay at sites on the East-Northeast list. The East-Northeast list is no longer relevant to our current operations. In the potential structure, substitutes will have the opportunity to earn higher pay at early hiring sites. And as stated before, the early hiring list is updated annually and based on the needs of the sites. Thank you.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Jara, again, Nadine Jones for the record. I want to thank you for your time and attention this evening. I also want to let you know that I was able to read the vast majority of the public comments regarding this topic. And my main takeaway is that the increase that we've discussed here today as a potential structure, or my main takeaway from reading the documents is that the increase is to be considered, but that it didn't go far enough is essentially what some of the comments said. And so I just want to clarify that this presentation is not intended to be an all-inclusive fix for some of the long-standing concerns in this area. I do definitely believe there is still more work to be done. For example, I think we could do a better job of strengthening our substitute teacher to licensed teacher pipeline, because ultimately that's what we want to be doing, is to moving people into the licensed role. And so that's definitely something that I intend to work on as an example of something else additional that I believe we can do. That does conclude our presentation and prepared remarks. And so at this time, I would like to open it up for questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I'm going to have trustees go with questions. I just want to note that Trustee Garvey originally requested this item. She is not here, and it's not because she doesn't feel this is an important item. She feels that her opinion and her questions will be able to be answered by the remaining board members, and she is committed to this cause. So I just wanted to let the public know that this is her item, and unfortunately she wasn't unable to be here. Trustee Cavazos?
Yes, Madam President, it's okay with you. I am still putting my notes together because I have several questions, so I would like to pass and let the next trustee in the queue go. If you can put me back later on, wherever it's convenient.
You are the only trustee in the queue, so I guess I will go.
Okay.
I'll go really quick. One question I have is, I understand it's really important for this. Obviously, I support increasing this. My question is, why, when we do increase this across the board for other employee groups, I understand that those are negotiated contracts, but is there a way to ensure that when we price out increases by 3% for all groups, for us to include others that maybe are not covered under contract, so that we don't go 20 years without giving them a raise?
So, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Ms. Jones. I think that's a great point, Trustee Brooks. I know that if it's the pleasure of the board, obviously that would be something that we can certainly do. I'll ask Ms. Jones to mention. I think we can certainly do that if it's a pleasure of the board for us to start moving into that practice. For once we make that decision, whatever we negotiate, certainly we can take into account to make that a priority for all our employees that are within the district.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Ms. Jones?
I didn't really. What I was going to say was that was a suggestion that I would be happy to speak with Mr. Gowdy about. He had to leave the call, but that's all I was going to say. So Dr. Dara certainly answered it better than I could.
Okay, no problem. It's just, to me, it just makes more sense that you would try to include all employees, even if they're temporary employees, so that when you price that out, it's factored in, and then they get a raise at the same time. It just definitely seems easier than waiting 20 years. Okay, some other trustees are up though. So Trustee Cepeda and then Trustee Ford.
Thank you. I definitely support Trustee Brooks' suggestion about just kind of when we're able to provide everyone raises, that it's across the board, regardless of bargaining unit. I would like to also thank you, Nadine, for mentioning expanding, well, for future, I guess, future consideration of expanding this pool, I guess, helping that pipeline basically from substitute teachers into helping them become licensed teachers. That's critical. So I'm glad that's already on the radar. My first question is regarding why, well, I don't know if we can't, but why not higher? Is there a reason why some of these raises are capped? I think I remember someone at a briefing mentioning that there was a reasoning why there was a cap, but I don't remember, and I think it'd be really good for the public to know. So is there a reason why we couldn't go higher with some of these pay raises?
As in specifically what's in this presentation?
Yes. I want to say from the last briefing, I remember there's a specific reason why didn't go higher, but again, I don't.
So essentially, the the numbers that are presented here are based on several factors. So one would be the slide that had the comparative. And so it looked as if this would place us relatively in line with some of those other comparative school districts. So that's one reason. The other reason, and something that I think we need to keep in mind, is that our licensed teachers, their extra instruction time is $22 per hour, I believe it is. And so it's like $157, I believe it is. And so we were really trying to, not go over that, that our licensed teachers get for extra instruction. So that was a little bit of the factor as well. Certainly not the only factor, but it was certainly something in the consideration.
Okay, I think it was that last one. I think that the teacher rate at $22 an hour. I think that was the one I remember. My second question is, again, because I know we didn't read the public comment, but Ron reiterate that I know all of us kind of read these. Dr. Hook from the CSN Department of Education, and I believe another one of her colleagues mentioned a highly qualified sub-level. Can you speak to kind of maybe why that was or was not considered?
As in, if you are already a teacher, and why not consider having them be a little bit higher? Is that the question?
Correct. Yeah. So I guess their suggestion was if you already, I believe they have an associate's degree for a highly qualified sub. From what I took away from their public comment, I guess again, was that considered? So I guess folks who already have an associate's, master's degree and come to substitute.
So we actually considered several different scenarios here. That was one of them. To be honest, I think at the time we were thinking of it holistically, as in, breaking down the substitute population and having those who had degrees have more than those who had the 60 credits. As we presented the different structures throughout the process, this one just seemed to be more, there was more receptivity, I guess I would say, to it. However, that doesn't mean that we couldn't carve just that out specifically, as in people who already have a full teacher's license. And if that's forward for us to look at doing something like that specifically for those who are licensed, then we can absolutely go back and do that.
I think I am interested to see kind of what that looks like. Again, if someone already has a bachelor's degree or master's degree and they're coming back to sub and have met all the qualifications, then that's where we can improve. So I'll yield my time and then cue myself in. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Cepeda. Trustee Ford?
Thank you. My first question is, have we figured out, and if so, what would it cost for us to be able to provide health insurance to our substitutes?
I will need to research that with Jason Gowdy. I actually do have that information. I'm sorry, I just don't have it handy right now. I do recall asking him that question previously, so I would just need to get that again, and I'd be happy to share that. But he did provide an estimate of that previously.
Okay, I don't remember what it was either. I requested that at a board meeting as a trustee request, and I know that it was sent, so I can look for it in a minute and then maybe jump back in at the end. So then my second question is, I guess kind of a comment. I do support Trustee Brooks, what you were saying about we need to make sure to not let the balls drop and figure out how to keep everyone getting raises and keep it really fair. But I don't want to group the substitute issue with, all of our employees yet, because, in my opinion, this isn't a raise. It's a first step towards an acceptable pay rate for substitutes. And while I'm super happy that we prioritized it, and it definitely was I would say the entirety of the board that wanted to do this, it's not enough in my opinion. And it still needs to be two different issues. Another thing is that when we compare what we're paying to the other districts listed in the reference material, at least most of those districts have other types of incentives, and they are also giving pay increases after a substitute has served for 100 days. So it's hard. It's like we can't really compare unless we're doing the same exact things that other districts are doing. And in fact, when comparing with another district, it's not just the hourly rate, but it's the substitute themselves, the teacher themselves. Like, what would life be like for that substitute or teacher in that district making that much money versus in our district making this much money? And that's how you really compare apples to apples. So when we look at all the other things that districts are providing their substitutes, along with better, working conditions and treatment and that kind of things that we talk about with teachers in general, it really isn't apples to apples yet. I do have a question that I think all the substitutes have been bringing to the meetings, and they keep on referencing a number. That number is 45 million. I believe it's the attrition money. And we do operate differently than other districts as far as autonomy of schools and their budgets. So, when a principal hires a substitute instead of a teacher, but they budgeted for the cost of a teacher, there's some money left over. And now all these schools have different amounts of money left over. And I believe that's a question that comes up mostly with the group of substitutes that we're talking about, or at least speak for most substitutes. So if we could get someone to answer that question, is that number 45 million, first of all? If it is, what are we doing with it? How does that work? Where is it really going to go? I would like to have a clear explanation of that answer. And then if we can get the other answer for the health insurance, then I'll be good.
Okay.
So to clarify, the question is, how do attrition dollars work in school budgets?
So what
but specifically with what it's going to look like with substitutes. Mm-hmm.
That's where attrition dollars come from.
Okay. To answer it.
Is that a request for further information, or if I can explain the 45 million?
I think he wants to know if you can give us a clear explanation of how vacancy dollars work and attrition dollars work at the school level. Is that correct?
Or if there's someone else that can explain it. I know that in my briefing with Jason, I did bring up the same question, and so he kind of knew it was coming. So if somebody can give the correct answer that everyone keeps asking, whether, first of all, if it even is 45 million, where we got that number and what we're going to do with it, and if, just all those things.
So I will put on my best CFO hat and answer it to the best of my ability. And certainly if there's anything missing, then I will be happy to get you that information. So I believe that the estimate of $45 million is accurate. It's very close anyways. And so how it's derived is the average cost of a full-time teacher minus the cost of the substitute. So that amount is approximately $65,000. So the difference is approximately $65,000. And then when I multiplied that by the 706 vacancy substitutes that are on our slide, that is $45 million. So my understanding is that money remains with the schools, as I believe you said, Trustee Ford, and that is their attrition money. As it relates to the additional cost of this potential structure, the 4.8 million that is on slide 9, what would happen is of that 1.6 million would basically reduce that carryover from the schools, right? Because now vacancy subs would cost an extra 1.6 million if this plan were to be adopted. And then the 3.2 million for the regular substitute cost, as outlined on page 9, would be an additional budget requirement to the district that we would need to find the funds for.
So, and if I may jump in, Madam President, the money, the balance of 45 plus million, the 45 million, approximately that number remains at the school under NS388G for building principals and SOTs to make decisions. So that is not money that we as a school system can take to use for other things. So under the law, the building principals have, part of their responsibility with their SOT to spend that money. As far as 3.2 and change, I know as the superintendent and working with the CFO, this would be as this is a priority of the board and all of us, that we would find the resources to make sure that we move forward with handling this situation for our subs. And I want to go back and something I failed to mention. You're right. This is the first step for something that hasn't been handled for 17, 18 years.
Okay, I guess I'm just a little bit, if you could just clarify what we can do as trustees, what you can do as a superintendent, based on, how do I say this? If that money is left over at a school, and now we know that it's going to cost that school much less to employ a substitute in a vacancy position, even though they're working the same amount of hours, doing the same job as a teacher, they're going to be saving that money. We can't tell the school individually what to do with that money, but wouldn't just increasing substitute pay in general kind of balance that out? And wouldn't that mean the money is there if it was going to go to a teacher? I guess when I think about it on paper, it's just not really making sense to me. There's more of a simple way to explain it. I don't know if I'm the only one not understanding it. I guess I'll let Trustee Cavazos and whoever else has questions chime in, and I might think about a better way to phrase my question. And I also want to look for that document. And if anyone else has it and you want to just answer the question of what it would cost to provide the substitute health insurance, that would be helpful as well.
Thank you. Trustee Ford, I think I understand what your question is. And the point Dr. Jara is making is that money stays with schools. And the goal is not to decrease that money. It's actually to have a qualified licensed educator in every single classroom so that money doesn't exist. Like, our goal isn't to spend down the money. Our goal is to put teachers in classrooms for students. So
I get that, but regardless, if we need a teacher, pay them that money. If it was going to go to someone else, give it to them. I mean, that doesn't just move the money over from one person to another. And I get that we still need to enhance our recruitment and retention efforts. So it's two separate things. But I guess when you write it down on paper, it's not really adding up to me. But I do understand the question, and I understand Jara's response. Thank you. I will maybe try to reformat it, and I'll go ahead and mute my mic now.
Great. Thank you. Trustee Young?
Hey. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. I think I'm making a little sense out of all of this. First of all, I think this is long overdue. I concur with everyone else. This is the beginning. I think there's a beginning of a perception change, even more than a financial. Of course, the finances and the benefits. I agree with Trustee Ford. We've got to look at this as a career with benefits. And I do feel we've got to start thinking about how it's identified. Everything comes about through a name. And I don't know if I have the answers. I'm just proposing the concept. I was in special education for a long time, and we talked about handicapped as opposed to challenge. We came up with emotionally disturbed instead of with emotional issues of upgrade or challenges. And we started playing around with names. And the name, and I mean no disrespect at all, but the name, if I give you an example, for example, I used to go to a lot of concerts, still do, and a lot of symphonies, and they would have a guest conductor. And the guest conductor maybe would be from a foreign country like Russia, or maybe from Spain, for maybe the New York Philharmonic or something like that. And they said, we have our guest conductor. They didn't say we had our substitute conductor. And so I would like for us to think about, instead of substitute, and I know that may be in all the federal documents and so forth. So I'm not saying that it isn't, but I'm saying let's think about guest, and I've heard other people say this before, guest teacher. When someone's a guest in your home, you treat them differently as a guest. When someone is coming in your home to be a substitute, maybe for your maybe for someone that has a mother that had to go out, but this is a substitute. It's a difference between this is a guest mom or a guest dad or not a substitute. So just a thought, just a thought. I don't know if there are any challenges to that because of federal regs. I know in special education we went through a lot of changes um, um, from handicap to the students who were retarded. Remember back in the days when a student was academically or educationally retarded? Remember, we don't use those words anymore. We've kind of moved away from that. Not that there aren't the same kind of issues and symptoms, but we use a different kind of approach to our students that I think we need to do for instead of substitute teachers, I would like to call them guest teachers. Now, I don't have, maybe you have another approach, but I just think it takes it diminishes things somewhat, and it makes it like you're not the real deal. You're not the real deal, and you're just here because maybe you have nothing else to do, or you're just, we've got to use you because we don't have a real person. But if you're a guest, you could bring a lot of support to the school and the educational environment. You could bring some unique skills and sets to the involvement with students if you are a guest. So I want to just bring that up as in terms of a perception. And then
Thank you. Trustee Young, one moment. I think that's technically their job classification, and that is, they are identified as guest teachers in some manner. Is that correct, Ms. Jones?
That's why I was asking to see if there are any legal impediments to changing the name, because it could be in the Federal Register too. And there may be a number of reasons why that can't happen, but I'd like to perhaps have it considered. We did that with special education.
Can we have Ms. Jones weigh in?
I was going to say, I think it can definitely be considered. I do know Kimberly, Ms. Daniels has said this often, that they do prefer to be referred to as substitute guest teachers or guest teachers. So I've certainly heard that before. I have not looked into whether or not would create any legal concerns from an NRS standpoint, or how the licenses are issued. I truly have not researched that. But internally, we do, just in our office, sometimes we do refer to them that way, but it sounds like the request is, can we make that more formal and more official? And I would need to check into that just to confirm that there aren't any conflicts in any other ways that, we may not know about.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the only reason I say that, I do think it would elevate the perception of the substitute, just in terms of just the name alone. And then I'd like to look at it, and perhaps you all are doing this, and maybe you can share that with us, Ms. Jones, in terms of the Guest Teacher Academy, where you get the professional training and you get the professional development, because there are some people that are looking at second careers that may not want to be in a permanent role, but wouldn't mind being as a guest teacher role, but more as a career option that we could develop along the line, and make it like an academy. You get a wonderful certification when you finish the Guest Teacher Academy of Clark County School District. Okay. In addition to the pay, I'm not taking away the pay, so nobody don't send me an email. I'm not diminishing that. That's a good start, and we need to go further. But also with the benefits, because there are people out there that would be interested in being a guest teacher, not on a permanent basis. But people see the substitute teacher as kind of a step down and kind of a demeaning role. And many don't find that it's even valued within the schools are sometimes not looked favorably by people in the schools or in the community. So if we could just, it's all about perception here. And then I would like to, in terms of professional training, to maybe once a month, like we do our teacher, the outstanding guest teacher of the month in Clark County School District, or somebody that could recommend an outstanding guest teacher. I know when I was out there, we had some wonderful guest teachers. They did a phenomenal job. And even to highlight them and share with them, and even have a area on our wall where we have outstanding teachers, because our teachers are phenomenal, our support staff are phenomenal, but our guest teachers could be phenomenal as well. And they are wonderful support to our Clark County School District. So I would like to just recommend that, if that could be considered in terms of an outstanding guest teacher award or outstanding guest teacher of the year, and present that to the Clark County School District Board. And then the other thing we had talked about for our teach academies. We have, I believe, 2 teach academies in the school district. Those students who are going to go on to be teachers while they're in the school district and maybe moving on to their educational program during the summer, or could qualify, or during sometime during part of the year could qualify to be guest teachers while doing their practicums and some other things. I don't know where that all is. I know we used to do a lot with that, but even with observations and being supported while they're going through their educational training, that they could also be a part of being a guest teacher down the line, while some of them continue to get additional funds to continue their education as part of that. And then of course the health benefits, I already talked about that. And I think I just about covered everything that I was thinking about with this, but this is such an important area, and it's so needed in the Clark County School District. And some of our people out there, they are phenomenal. I mean, just wonderful in the sense of their commitment to students, to the school, to the staff. And when they come into our schools as a guest, we can embrace them as a part of our team and a part of being a guest to our educational program, and certainly elevating the school district while we elevate them. So if we could check on maybe the Teach Academy, when students reach 1 or 2 years. I know Teach Academy does a great job with students while they're in the 11th and 12th grade, 10th grade. They do a great job. You get a chance to go over and see that. But I'm just thinking there's just a lot we can still do, but everything is perception, in addition to the money, the funding, in addition to the benefits, but also in the recognition of their worth and their contribution to the Clark County School District.
Thank you, Trustee Young. I do think this topic requires a comprehensive approach, and this is just the first step. It's the first step that we've been able to bring forward, but that doesn't mean that there's not additional work that needs to be done or that's going to be done. Did you want to add anything, Ms. Jones?
No, I don't. I mean, I completely agree with the things that Trustee Young mentioned. A lot of it does come down to the recognition, and it really is an overall approach. So I think you said it really well. It needs a very comprehensive approach, and we're aware of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, thank you to Ms. Jones, Ms. Daniels for putting together this presentation and for the comprehensive briefings that they gave us. I think that most of how the board feels has been covered pretty much as far as being in consensus that this is long overdue, and I would hope that it would not take another 20 years before we go further with these proposals. I know that was before you were here. That was before I was on the board, but I was a sub at the beginning of my teaching career. In the presentation, I won't belabor the point because somebody else has already brought it up. I believe it was Trustee Ford, that our comparisons when we do have something like this, and we discussed it briefly the other day, that I think that we need to be really cognizant of making comparisons that are to comparable school districts. And, like for instance, LA Unified and what they pay and what we are comparing ourselves with, whether it's Denver, Albuquerque, or whatever. So that's just kind of something that I'm just putting out there. I'm going to try to drill down here because so much of this has already been talked about at previous board meetings. I think this is one of the areas where I wish we would have been able to hear all the comments in their entirety, because just like previous board meetings, with people being forced to put their comments written, they were very eloquent, they were very specific. And the thing that really struck me was that a lot of the comments did not come just from people that are present substitutes, came from our licensed teachers, our time teachers who started out as substitutes. And their comments are very, I would really almost have to say that they were very poignant, very heartfelt when they talked about wanting to take a day off because they were sick, wanting to take a day off because they had a seminar, they had something they were going to go to, and then their office managers and the entire department having to scramble because they could not find a sub. I heard from present teachers that do not want to sell their preps anymore, but they feel that they're pressured into selling their preps. So I don't think it's just about the money, but again, as the previous colleagues talked about, we cannot, just like we cannot do without our support professionals, our bus drivers, we cannot do without our teachers, we cannot do without our substitutes. We cannot run our school system without our substitutes. If our substitutes, I can't even talk now, sorry, were to decide en masse that they were not going to come back, I don't know where we would be. We are losing teachers right and left. If we are going to recruit and retain teachers, we cannot do that if we don't have a full-time teacher that feels that if they need to take a day off, that a sub's going to be there for them and they don't have to leave a sick child at home. So that brings me to the bottom of kind of the drilling down, is that we're kind of, and I recognize that we're looking at budget cuts coming down the road. We don't know exactly what those are going to look like right now. I think that this is a good first step. I think that you stated very honestly, Ms. Jones, that you did read through the comments and you realized that this is only a first step. But one thing that really strikes me right now is that we've been talking for weeks as all of us struggle to do the best that we can and to stay together in getting through this pandemic, is that we're looking at something different now. We're looking at something to where some people are going to be afraid to go back to work. Some people have underlying conditions. So what do we do? What are we saying when we say to our substitutes? And I realize that this is something that's going to be an ongoing thing. It's not something we can solve in one day. But if we are not giving sick pay or health benefits to our substitutes, are we then forcing them, as several of the public commenters said, to choose between missing a day of pay or going into work sick or not having the resources to get their own private insurance? I know that I would not want to be in that predicament. When I was a single mom and working as a sub, I was fortunate enough to also be working another job as a waitress. So culinary covered my health costs. So I think right now we are looking at propagating, I'm looking for the right word here, a really serious health crisis as we look at our reopening schools. And I realize that you cannot do this all in one fell swoop, but I think that this situation that we're in right now, it's something that we have to look at. When we talk about our social, emotional aspects, we talk about the fear and anxiety that our district has been trying very, very hard to address, sometimes very well, and other times, we're still trying hard, and we're going in all different directions. But I myself am extremely worried about what is going to happen if we have a large percentage of our substitutes and our regular teachers and our support professionals. Those two groups do have access to health care, but our substitutes do not. So I just want to put that out there on the table. And I think it's, I think that my colleague, Trustee Wright, brought that up in our briefing, that it's always the elephant in the room. So I'm not sure quite where we go from here. I know that this is a good step to take. It's a very small step to take after 20 years, but it's a step. So I'm just hoping that there's some way that your department, as we are working with our budget, that we look at a timeline for making sure that these folks that have to deal with the same class sizes, have to deal with everything that a regular teacher has to do, besides having to, do the extra duties of a substitute, that we're going to consider that for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee
Very
Glasgow.
well said.
I do not have any additional trustees with questions. Did you have anything to add, Ms. Jones?
I do not. I just want to thank you all very much for your input, feedback, and support. So thank you.
So-
Go ahead, Superintendent Jar.
Madam President, so what I'm hearing, we will make this a priority in our budget process. I will work with the Chief Finance Officer to make this a priority. We will get this, the request to Trustee Ford on the information on the cost of the benefits, but we will make this a priority in our budget and make necessary changes within our budget for next year.
Thank you. I do think that that is the opinion of all. I haven't heard any board members express any not supporting this. So we have in the past wanted to make this a priority. So bring that back to us so that we know what it looks like financially.
Thank you for the clarification. That's what I was hearing, a consensus of the board. Thank you.
I guess I have one quick question.
Okay, Trustee Ford, go ahead.
I can't for the life of me find where that answer was in that memo, but we did just change how we do all that. So it's more organized since that has been sent. But I guess my question is, since we got the answer, what are we doing regarding substitutes, guest teacher health benefits? Is that something that we're trying to get to? Is that a goal? If so, where are we on it? Or are we not going to do it? Like just anything as far as what a substitute might expect for CCSD to start providing that.
Madam President?
Just to clarify, yes. Before you go, I'll let you speak, but before you go, just want to be mindful of the fact that the only thing in this petition is Superintendent Jara.
No, I was just, Madam President, thank you. I was just going to say I'll have to go back and get the number. Right now, for this budget cycle and for this year, this would be where we will be moving forward. We'll have to go back and look at that. As I hear from the board, we'll have to bring that back for whatever the long-term commitment that we will be able to make, given the budget challenges that we are facing as a state and as a school system right now. We still don't have the budget reduction expectations for next year, but we feel very confident that we will be able to make
You're
necessary
breaking up a little bit. Hold on. You're breaking up a little bit, so can you start from like the middle of that?
Sure. So what I can say is that we feel very confident that we can make the necessary changes to the budget to accommodate what you have before you. That could be part of a long-term, and then obviously bring that back to this board for what healthcare or whatever it is I have to go back and sit with Mr. Gowdy and our insurance and see what this cost may be.
Okay. If you could resend that to us, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ford. Thank you, Ms. Jones and your team. And then we look forward to getting an update about this in the future and how you're going to make this happen.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to close that agenda item. We're going